Essay number 1, part 1, taking notes. So the first part of any essay assignment is really understanding the instructions and getting to work, taking notes. So we have the background here, which you would read about what we've been doing and the purpose. Then when you read this section, it'll tell you what your task is. Find a podcast we haven't listened to as a class, and then study and take notes on 2 good episodes. Okay, so you're finding a new podcast or a different podcast, and you're picking 2 good episodes. So, for example, I will use one that we do know, which is Death, Sex, and Money, and I'll pick 2 episodes from that. You also want to look ahead to the different elements of the essay. The first part is introduce us to this podcast in general. So in this case, we're talking about death, sex, and money. So I need to be able to talk in general terms about the podcast overall, not just one episode, but what is this podcast? Who is the host? How does she structure most of the shows? Are there certain themes or gimmicks? Show us you have listened to it enough to know how it generally goes. Then bring the introduction to a close with a strong thesis statement. So for taking notes, we need to get to know this podcast a little better. So we go back, we look up the show, Death, Sex, and Money, and we start going through the different episodes. And I already know Cristela Alonso's Lower Classy Comedy, but maybe I'm going to listen to the student loan one, or I'm going to go check out some different episodes, listen to them. I may even read the transcripts. Some podcasts will have transcripts. And then I start taking notes. So let me show you my notes. So I've got one of my episodes figured out. Cristela Alonso's Lower Classy Comedy. Of course, that'll be in quotes when I write about it in my essay. I've got the name of the podcast show. That will be in italics in my essay. And I've got the URL or web address of one of the episodes. I still need to get another one. And here are my notes. So as I'm listening to different episodes, I notice that the host interviews other people. That's the main part of the show, an interview show. The host's name, Anna Sale. I think she has a great voice, a good laugh, and she comes across as a kind person. In one of her episodes, she is actually interviewed by someone else, and she talks about putting herself into the shoes of the person she interviews and trying to understand their perspective. As I listen to some more and scroll down, I notice sometimes she interviews couples, sometimes just solo, one person. Sometimes she returns to people she's already interviewed and interviews them again, or returns to themes from previous shows. What stands out? Well, there's a lot of laughter. She laughs at their jokes. She adds in narration about her purpose. So by narration, I mean she doesn't just ask a question and then they answer it, question, then they answer it, but she steps back and says something, some context or background information about this person. She'll say, Cristela Alonso struggled with going to college and her mom getting sick, and then she'll play Cristela Alonso talking about that, and then she'll back up and give us some more narration. So the narrator is different from the interviewer. Interviewer asks the questions, gets the answers. Narrator makes sense of it, tells us what it means. I also notice sometimes she'll have background music lightly playing while she's being the narrator and talking about the person. So she intersperses audio, she goes back and forth. I also looked up Anna Sale. Gotta get her name right. And I found out she was a reporter. She used to cover politics and elections. She was from West Virginia, but she went to Stanford out here and studied history. And I believe she now lives in Berkeley, California. The next step is from my episodes, picking out possible quotes that I'm going to use, because if you look back at the assignment, first there's a summary with no quotes, but then there's the Stedman paragraph, which will be built around a quote in the second sentence. So I need to have some good, interesting, and by quotes I don't mean that it had quotation marks around it or anything like that. I just mean that she said, the interviewer, the host, or anyone in the episode said something interesting, and I'm going to use that to craft a paragraph for my response. So I just start copying and writing down quotes that I like from the episode, like when Cristela Alonso said, "My mom would be like, Mija, why aren't you wearing makeup? 'Cause I'm going to bed, dude." I just thought it was funny, but also interesting because it's a little bit of a cultural intersection here when you're talking about dude and mija in the same sentence. That's interesting to me. So I'm putting it in here as a possible quote. I also, this one, when she said, "I cried a lot because everything that I've done with my career, every time I get like a break, I always think of my mom before anything else." So this just had emotional impact for me. It moved me. So that's a possible quote to use. Then she talked about building Legos by herself in her apartment. I just found that interesting, and I think there's more I could say about that. I don't know what I would say yet. When I'm taking notes, I'm often just looking for what moves me emotionally, what makes me laugh, what is just interesting to me that I can make sense of later. And this other one where she talked about her mom not having community because she was working all the time, just trying to help them survive. That was really interesting to me, to think about what I could say about this idea of not being able to have the time to have community. So that I would need to do again for another episode to really be ready. I would need my other quotes and ideas. And then for each one, I need to have the works cited part figured out. And remember, that's not going to be bold or italics. It's just going to be straight up works cited, that part centered, and then the rest is going to be last name, comma, first name of the host or the writer, the name of the episode in quotes, the name of the podcast in italics, the date of the episode, and the URL, the web address of the particular episode. And this is the part one of getting started on your essay. If you do this right, it makes everything else much easier.